The truth hurts. Twitter names a new CEO who is, as his own words say, not interested in the truth, but rather what causes harm, because now we have two different realities that the world works under. One is that there is truth, and one is if the truth hurts, then should that truth be removed, because we cannot have harm existing in this universe. Those are the two realities we've got to take a look at. And what does Jesus have to say about this whole thing? Welcome to Church Public. Let's get started. Well, again, welcome back to Church Public. Thank you so much for joining me, Matt Odegaard, here today. We are talking about culture, and we're talking about faith and the intersection of the two, and how does that where does that leave you as a follower of Jesus? How do you know what to do in this crazy world? Do you follow after the culture chasing its tail? Or do you follow something greater, something bigger, something in a different worldview? And of course, I'm going to suggest that you don't follow this culture down the rabbit hole, because it seems, as Lewis Carroll said, let's see how far this rabbit hole goes. And I don't think there's an end. I don't think there's an end to how far down the world this rabbit hole exists. I just think that it just continues forever and ever. And it's just an abyss that you don't want to go into. Rather, what I would suggest is you find the actual truth in something stronger, in something bigger, in something deeper. And my suggestion is going to be, probably not surprising, that you find your truth in God. You find your truth in God's Word, who gives it to you. I saw a post the other day that said, wouldn't it be great if God just wrote you a message and you could have a phone call with God, and you could just sit in your kitchen and talk to God and tell him what you think, and he would tell you what he thinks. And it was a serious, I'm not making a joke. Like, it was a serious post saying, wouldn't it be great if this existed? And wouldn't it be great if you could just connect with God in this way? And I wanted to shout and scream, into the computer and say, you have it. Like, it's there. All you got to do is open up this book. There's a couple thousand pages of God telling you what he thinks about things. It's not a mystery. That's the thing that just, it drives me crazy, that we're apparently in this world where the world says God is a mystery, or life is a mystery, and there's no way to know the mystery, or if you know the mystery, only certain people know the mystery. It's this whole conundrum. And the reality is, no, it's not a mystery. It doesn't have to be a mystery. God has revealed it. And all you have to do is read it. And if you don't know where to start in the Gospels, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. It's a great time to do that, because we're coming up on Christmas. We're now in December. You can read the story of Jesus and why Christmas is so important. Beyond the lights and the sparkly things and the gifts and all the other stuff, there's actually a really big point. Well, again, this is why I'm here with Church Public. I want to help you understand what is going on in this world, make sense of it, and hopefully live in it, but not be like it, as Jesus has said, be in the world, but not of the world. So today we are looking at the truth, because, and we tend to always come back to the truth, but I think it's interesting, and we have a big story today coming out of the tech media world and the tech giants, that Twitter now has a new CEO. And it's important that we talk about this story, because it really gets down to, I think, the heart of truth. It really is like, this is the kernel of everything that's going on, not just on Twitter, but in the whole, universe as we know it, as far as what is truth and what is not. So Twitter has named a new CEO, Parag Agrawal, and I probably butchered that name, and I apologize. That's the best I can do. So Jack Dorsey has left, and he was not a great person in terms of leading the fight for free speech and truth. But this new CEO, who was the apparently previous CTO, Chief Tech Officer, or something like that, is quite a person as well. So a couple things about this new person. The new CEO. And a lot of people are pointing to this. I'll show you this if you're watching online. If you're not watching online, that's fine. If you're just listening, I'll describe everything I show. Some of the clips we'll do today are just audio clips anyway, so that's fine. But if you want to see some of this, you can go to churchpublic.com, click the news or the podcast button, and you can get a link to the videos there to watch the videos, or just go directly to YouTube. Anyway, so this is the new Twitter's CEO, and this is something he said a couple of years ago. This is I think the biggest tweet that's getting airplay, where he says, quote, "If they are not going to make a distinction between Muslims and extremists, then why should I distinguish between white people and racists?" So that's a great statement for you there. And that's getting a lot of play on conservative media and all over the place, because obviously that's a terrible statement to say, that if you say that sometimes Muslims do terrible things in the name of their God, which you go back and listen to the whole talk about Afghanistan. I go into that in quite a bit. I'm not going to go into that as much today. Then this person says there should be no difference between saying all white people are racist. That's essentially what this tweet says. So that's bad. It's bad. But that's not actually the biggest thing that I think we should talk about today. And the reason is, this comes from, I want to play you a clip. This is an audio clip. So again, if you're just listening on audio, you don't have to worry about the video. You're not going to see anything here, but this is a video interview that he did for the MIT Technology Review. And so what you'll hear is there's first an interviewer asking a question. And this interviewer is asking a question like, who gets to decide what's misinformation? And so this was, I believe, back in 2020, so a year or so ago, when this new CEO was, again, the chief tech officer, apparently in some sense in charge of misinformation, right? You've probably heard a lot of misinformation about misinformation. We talk about it here too. So who gets to decide what is misinformation? And I believe, we'll listen in here and I'll come back to it, but I believe the interviewer actually says then, what is truth? And then you hear the answer, and we'll come back to this answer. So I want to play this for you, and then we'll come back.
Who gets to decide what is misinformation? Can you give a clear clinical definition of misinformation? Does something have to have malicious intent to be misinformation? How do you know if your credible sources are truthful? What's measuring the credibility of those sources? And someone even saying, I've seen misinformation in the so-called credible sources. So how do you define that phrase?
I think that's the existential question of our times. Defining misinformation is really, really hard. As we learn through time, our understanding of truth also evolves. We attempt to not adjudicate truth. We focus on potential for harm. And when we say we lean on credible sources, we also lean on all the conversation on the platform that also gets to talk about these credible sources and points out potential gaps, as a result of which the credible sources also evolve their thinking or what they talk about. So we focus way less on what's true and what's false. We focus way more on potential for harm as a result of certain content being amplified on the platform without appropriate context.
So if it got cut off there at the end, it was without appropriate context. So this is the new CEO of Twitter. I want to hone in on a couple of things that he specifically said. And again, if you're listening on any of the platforms, you can go back and listen. I know there he has quite an accent, so you may not have got it the first time, but go back and listen. Listen to the words that he says about truth and about misinformation. It's very important to understand this, because this is now the person who is in charge of all of the social media world, which is called Twitter, and beyond, because Twitter, Facebook, Insta, all the other places, they kind of bounce around on who is going to be further down this road. And so if one goes further down this road, you can bet that the other will follow. And in fact, believe it or not, Twitter has been the one that is behind the most in this, in terms of allowing the most, even though many people, as I've discussed over the past several months, have been kicked off Twitter for various things. So they do that. But the interviewer asks, who gets to decide what's information and what is truth? This is really the important thing. And I agree with this CEO in his answer that says this is the most existential question of our time. That means the question that affects us and our reality the most. I agree. And in fact, I go back a lot to Jesus talking to Pilate, because Pilate asked Jesus the same question, what is truth? And Jesus' answer is different. And we're going to actually look at what Jesus says in a moment in John 8. We're going to get to that. But But I want to highlight a couple of things that this new Twitter CEO says. One of them is, we're trying to thread a needle of mitigating harm caused by false content without becoming an arbiter of truth. He said this actually at a different point in the interview, and he says here that Twitter doesn't adjudicate truth. That means they don't judge what is true or not true. It's all about harm. They focus on harm. So do you see what's happening here? What's happening, and I'm not going to get too philosophical today in terms of philosophers like Derrida or other ones. I'm not going to throw out a bunch of names. I'm just going to say generally, this is postmodernism in its kernel, right? Is there a truth, or does truth even matter? And does what really matters, the only thing that matters, is harm? So this is where we'll read more from Jesus in a moment, which is from John 8, where Jesus says, you'll know the truth and the truth will set you free. And as a society, we actually knew that and we believed that. In fact, I would say America was built on that. It was built on this idea of truth and liberty and freedom in truth. The truth will set you free. And we used to know, and again, I'm going to read more of Jesus' words in a minute because I think it really helps us illustrate this. But Jesus goes on to say that lies actually are what enslave you. When you sin, you become a slave to sin. And when you lie, it's a sin. And so lies create this bondage within yourself because you're slave to lies. And you know this inherently if you've ever lied about something, because if you lie once, you have to keep that lie going forever. And usually the lies compound because then you have to lie more to cover up the first lie. And you know this if you've lied at all ever in your life. If you've never lied in your life, you may be lying now. No, but we all know this. We all know this is true inherently, but this new postmodern deconstruction says, oh, this isn't true anymore. Now, if something is bad for you, it has to be eliminated. So that's where you get to the second statement of, one is the truth will set you free. The other is the truth hurts. Both things are actually true, but the problem is we're only going to focus on the truth hurts. So if the truth hurts, then we cannot listen to the truth. Instead, we have to change to just, well, if it harms you, we have to get rid of that because we cannot have harm. We have placed safety over truth, and we can only go with what keeps you safe. That's what the CEO is saying. Again, go back and listen to it again, and you start hearing these themes very clearly in some of the bigger words that he used, like adjudicate, right? We don't use that all the time, but it means we're not going to judge the things on true or false. We're going to judge them based on, well, are your feelings hurt by this? In that case, we're going to get rid of it. And that is misinformation. Misinformation isn't, is it true or false? Misinformation is, does it hurt you? Then we have to get rid of it. This is a really bad road to go down. We've already begun to go down this. We know this is true, but we have to point these things out when they happen. And you have to realize, again, I don't mean to give like tomorrow's news today or point to where this is going, but the reality is when we let people like this lead the corporations that are in charge of, for better or worse, the entire public square. This is where ideas are shared. This is where relationships are made and broken. This is where you have your arguments. It's on Twitter. It's on Facebook. It's on Instagram. This is where people meet and talk about ideas. So if the person who is in charge of the whole thing says you can't say true things if they hurt feelings, we're in a world of hurt because in general, because if there is no truth, then we've talked about this before, then whatever you want to be true is true. And that's what we're seeing. And that's where reality bumps into this because we've separated this thing. A good thing might be good and true, but we're going to say it's hurtful, so you have to get rid of it. Something might be false, but if it makes you feel good, then we have to say it is good, and therefore it is true, even if it's false. Do you see that? I mean, your head's probably spinning on this, but this is what these people think about all day, and they put in rules now to make you go down this path. And if you don't go down this path, again, you get kicked off of the whole path. You get kicked out of Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, etc., and then your voice is gone. Right? That's this cancel culture that we're talking about, and the best example that we can have of this is this new issue of, it's not even that new, but this issue of transgender reality and what is reality. But before we get to that, I do want to read a little bit of Jesus as he talks about the truth in Matthew 8. And I think this is really helpful to listen to and to read. You can go and read this for yourself. I'm going to start about verse 31 because Jesus is talking to the Jewish leaders and they're questioning his authority and whether he is able to say true things or whether he is just lying and pretending to be God, right? That's the context of what we're going into here. So to those Jews who believed, Jesus said, if you hold my teaching, you really are my disciples. You will know the truth, and the truth will set you free. They answer and say, we are Abraham's descendants, which means they are Jews. And they say, we've never been slaves. How can you say we will be set free? In other words, they already believe they're free, so they're not, slave to anything. So what is he talking about? How can you be free from something that you weren't a slave to in the first place? And he says, I tell you the truth. Anyone who sins is a slave to sin. Again, fast forward to Romans, where Paul explains this really well, saying we are all stuck in our sin and we cannot get out of that sin without God's help. This is what Jesus is referring to. And Jesus is saying, if the Son sets you free, this is verse 36, you probably heard this verse. If the Son sets you free, you're free indeed. This is what Jesus is talking about. He's talking about freedom in the truth. When you know the truth, when you live in the truth, you are actually free. When you pretend lies that are not real, then you live in bondage. You are not free because you've created a world that's not a real world and that cannot exist. I think it's very interesting that I'm not going to read all of this. You can go read it for yourself later, but I am going to skip to verse 42. And Jesus says, if God were your father, you would love me. I came from God and now I'm here. I've not come on my own, but he sent me. Listen, 43. Why is my language not clear to you? You are unable to hear what I say. You belong to your father. That's not God he's talking about. He says, Jesus specifically says, the devil. You want to carry out your father's desire. He was a murderer from the beginning, not holding to the truth. There is no truth in him. When he lies, he speaks his native language. He's a liar and the father of lies. I'm going to stop there for now and just have you understand, because I've talked about this before, but it's really important to understand. It's really important to understand that when you follow after God, you are a son of truth or daughter of truth. You are a follower of truth because Jesus himself is the embodiment of truth. If you lie about anything, but if you lie specifically about these spiritual things, you're not a follower of Jesus. You're living off in this other land. And unfortunately, as Jesus points out, there's only two places. You either live in the kingdom of God or you live in the kingdom of the devil, who's the father of lies, and you're living in the lies. And this is very harsh. And this is why it doesn't feel good to hear these things. And you go back to that thing I said earlier, the truth hurts. It does hurt. And that's why Jesus is so good at grace as well, because individually in his interactions and his relationships with people, he doesn't bash people over the head with this truth, but he lovingly brings them into the kingdom. But he also never leaves them where they are in their sin. And he points out their sin when he runs into people and says, hey, you need to change your ways, go off and sin no more. He says that constantly and consistently. But we've grown into these two places where either, and the way culture views Christianity is that it's just a hammer of truth that you have to do it this way or I'm going to smash you down, or the fake Christianity, the woke Christianity that we're encountering so much of today is, well, it's all grace, it's all love, love wins. Doesn't matter what you do, doesn't matter what you say, doesn't matter how you believe, because God loves you and you are love and God is love and it's all love and Jesus is you and you are Jesus, and it goes on into this weird, like, mushy marshmallow place. That's just not real, and it's just not reality, and unfortunately it is lies, and it's just enough off of the truth that it might sound good, it might feel good, but it's not real. And Jesus is saying to these Pharisees, remember, the Pharisees were the people who studied the Bible the most, knew the most about the Bible, taught other people about the Bible, and yet went off the cliff as far as what was true and what wasn't. That's why this is so important to remember. They're not this group of people that didn't know anything or didn't know any better. They supposedly knew way better. They are smarter than me. They're probably smarter than you. And yet they missed the point of Jesus' truth. And that's why this is so important. And it leads us to this place, again, where when we hear that the CEO of Twitter is not interested in the truth and is going to punish truth if it hurts, we have to be aware of that. And we have to we have to know, on the one hand, we have to steel our hearts, like we have to grow our hearts in courage, because we're going to have to live in courage in these moments when the culture is more and more going to be coming at us. If we stand for the truth, that's when you're the one who sticks your head up. You're the one who's going to get, your head chopped off, because you're the one who's standing. Everybody else is trying to duck under this and say, let's just not say anything. Let's just pretend it doesn't happen. Let's pretend it's not real. That's not a way to live, and it's not a good way to live. You need to believe in something and stand for something. That would be my encouragement to you, because as Jesus says, the truth does set you free, but it's not going to be without cost. That's the reality of the situation. And unfortunately, this culture is saying the lie sets you free. And that's the crazy thing. And we're going to be coming back and looking at a bunch of different news stories. I want to highlight a few just today, but I want to show the opposite of this. And in the news today, I don't have a result yet, so I haven't said it yet. But I mentioned the other day that a really important case started yesterday for unborn lives. And the Supreme Court is hearing arguments on this Mississippi case, and hopefully we'll get a favorable review, and it actually will repeal Roe versus Wade and save a lot of unborn babies. We're going to hear more about that later. But what I want to tell you in this instance of truth versus lie is really important. Here's the thing. The truth is a baby, whether it's just conceived or born or, all of these things. But the world wants to tell you that a baby's not a baby, and the world wants to tell you it's just a clump of cells, or there's all these other euphemisms, right? We've talked about those before. So this is what I want to show you. And this is from, of all places, the Satanic Temple, that says, and this is related to the Mississippi case. It's related to Roe v. Wade, and it's related to the Texas case, where Texas has the 6-week ban on abortion. After 6 weeks, basically, you cannot have an abortion according to the law now. So this is the Satanic Temple saying they encourage any member who is a Texas resident and seeks to perform an abortion ritual to contact us for legal assistance, because they want you to be able to have an abortion. And the reason this makes a difference here is a tenet of the Church of Satan, the Satanic Temple, is abortion is actually a ritual. It is actually a rite, a sacrament of their religion. To do an abortion is like our communion in Christianity. I know that's terrible and sounds gross, but this is, again, just the reality. And they're calling a true thing a lie, and they're calling a lie the truth. And it's important to understand this is what you get to when you pretend that something is not real. Reality will come back around, and I want you to fully understand the reality of this situation. And, speaking of different policies, I think one of the greatest examples of this, especially on social media, of truth and lies is you can't say that a man is a woman and a woman is a man. You can't say that on social media. You can't type that. You will be banned, because that's hurtful to certain communities, even if it is true. This is a great example of what we've been talking about here. And this leads to terrible policies that have real world consequences. And we saw in Loudoun County, Virginia, a poor teenage girl was assaulted in a bathroom by a person who was a boy identifying as a girl, going into the girl's restroom, and there was an assault that happened. And then apparently the same person who was a boy identifying as a girl got transferred to another school and did the same thing to another person. And so I have to report that this new policy in California is in Long Beach, I believe, Long Beach is I believe, the school where this is happening. And this is their plan for an all-gender locker room. They're going to have an all-gender locker room. And this is a brand new, exciting policy that they're having. It's an aquatic center. It's a locker room. And this is under a Measure E bond program. Long Beach will be welcoming for the LGBTQ community, allowing students to use the bathrooms and locker rooms consistent with the gender they identify with. Again, regardless of the gender listed on their school records. I can't see this going well. I can't see this being a thing that is helpful, and it also gets into this place where ideologically it's a thing that just eats itself. It just goes around and around in a circle, because the point is to keep people safe and safe from harm. But as we've seen, even in Virginia, this doesn't keep people from harm, especially those female students, when males identifying as females are in their locker rooms or in their changing rooms. Again, this is not a great situation, and we really need to watch out for certain of these things. And speaking of policies, there also is, I just wanted to show you this. This is the new gender definition that allows people to figure out, what they are, how they identify, I guess. I'll just show you this picture. This is the new gender definitions, and I won't leave this up for you. I may link it on the page later, but I just want you, if you're not looking at this, I'll describe it in 10 seconds, that you have 6 different things on here: gender, transgender, cisgender, which is ostensibly regular, non-binary, gender fluid, and gender queer. Now, if you're not watching, what you don't see is that they all have these really nice bright colors, pinks and blues and purples, and one of them even has green. I'm not sure what all the colors mean. They mean something, but I didn't bother to find out. I just want to point out, though, again, if you're not watching, one of them is not like the other ones, and that would be the cisgender, which again is just normal, heterosexual. It's just gray. It's just boring. It's white and gray. So again, if you don't believe they're aiming at kids with these things, look at pictures like this and look at the idea that how exciting would it be to choose one of the ones with all of the colors, and how boring is it to be normal? It's just boring. Like, who wants to be normal? And that's what I see in this picture, at least. And again, we're getting to what is true, what is not true. Does truth even matter? And I would say it does matter, because you get into these crazy policies, and we have to figure out, what are we going to do with this? What are we going to do with these policies, and how are we going to deal with this in terms of reality? And I'll point you back to Scripture. I'll point you back to Jesus. You can read John 8 for yourself and read Jesus' words when he talks about this. And it shouldn't be lost on you that when Jesus is talking about the truth to these Pharisees, and then later on when he is talking to Pilate, and Pilate says, what is truth? When Jesus is talking about him literally being the embodiment of the truth, and that you have to follow the truth, Pilate, who represents the world, who represents the culture, is saying that basically there is no truth. I make the truth. And that's this postmodern world we're in. That's why this Twitter CEO thing, the trans policy things, all of it come together in this kernel of, if you don't know what the truth is, if you pretend that you're going to make your own truth, or you do you, or you find your truth, or live your truth, or whatever statement you're using these days, if you just live in that, unfortunately, you're going to hit the end of that wall, because it cannot go all the way. The lies, the falseness, it doesn't lead you to the freedom that this culture claims it does. It leads you to being enslaved. It leads you to this place where we have the most depression, the most suicide of any generation ever recorded. And this is the end result, because you don't know who you are. You don't know where you go. When you define yourself based on yourself, but then someone else tells you you're not, but then you're waiting for constant affirmation for somebody else, and you just spin and spin and spin. It's talked about the sword of Damocles the other day. You can go back and listen to that on churchpublic.com, but it's just a really hard place to be for this new generation. And I've been studying a lot about these two new generations, Generation Z and Generation Alpha, which is the youngest. It really is a hard time, but we have to lay these lines of truth. We have to do it in as much grace as we can. Yes, of course, I'm saying that. Don't be brutal and don't be dictatorial in the truth, but we also have to say true things. We can't shy away from what is true just because it doesn't feel good. That's what this Twitter CEO is proposing. Apparently, that's how they're building their algorithms, and they're behind the scenes. But we can't do that. Yes, the truth hurts, but it also sets you free. And as Jesus says, you want to be free indeed. This is the good news of the gospel, and we have to move towards that, not the lies, because the person who controls the lies, the person who is the author of the lies, is the other person that is not God. And if it were up to me, I would say, don't be in that camp. You don't want to be in that camp. The road where that camp is not the place you want to end up. I'll leave it there for today. Thanks for listening. Thanks for watching. I really appreciate it. This is Matt Odegaard for Church Public. As always, God bless, and I do hope that you will keep the faith.